and confirm that, and then we'll get into it.
Cool.
All right, I can see us. Cool. We're on. So, group
Cool.
and or listening to this in podcast format. So myself, Ty, and then obviously Matt Leggy, we're your hosts and co-hosts, whatever you want to call it. And today what we're going to be talking about is all things testosterone, aren't we?
Yes, we are. We are. I didn't like the way you introduced it the first time when you said you want to touch on my testosterone. So I wasn't sure where that was going to go. Wasn't sure where that one was going to go.
Are you sure?
Well, we'll see what happens when we get into the topic. We will mention oxytocin and all sorts of stuff and autophagy.
Yeah.
Weird words like that.
Well, it's something that I feel like is very much so declining in this day and age is testosterone. Like men are getting less manly or manly.
No, and that's happening. And the stats are showing it. There's some horrifying headlines coming out about the levels of testosterone in most people now compared to people in the past and that sort of stuff. And there's a lot of reasons for it. And we'll cover a lot of those reasons today. It's not just your degree of manliness. It's also the estrogen soup that we live in with all of our plastics and pesticides and then the whole industry stuff. So we'll talk a lot about, all of the factors in the environment that will inhibit testosterone as well.
Yeah, spot on.
Yeah.
Well, and I see there's a few people starting to roll in saying hello and stuff like that. So for those of you who are rolling in here live and whatnot, feel free to drop any questions in here as we're going, and then we'll be sure to touch on them at the end. But the start of this, we'll just start to flow through this because there's a few cool things that I want to touch on, even with my specific experience with testosterone and in relation to having a shitload of it and then not having so much of it, and then what we did to fix that up. And I don't know if I actually made you aware of it, but I followed everything that you told me about a few different herbs and, the shilajits and things like that. And that's how I managed to get my sperm motility and natural testosterone back to a good level from being crashed after, the bodybuilding days and things like that. But we'll get into it with a bit of an overview as to what you think or what you found is the common trends these days. Why are we getting less testosterone and more estrogen?
Yeah. Well, we have a lot of rubbish in our environment is a major part of it. If you consider that things like plastics, pesticides, fertilizers, cadmium from fossil fuels, all the PCBs and phthalates, and now there's PCBs of PCFs, and there's all these different plasticky like chemicals that are floating through our environment that interfere with the enzymes. And so, in the last couple of podcasts, we've talked about detox a fair bit and talked about phase 1 and phase 2 enzymes. And so phase 1 detoxification enzyme systems designed to clear away poisons and venoms and toxins. And they basically speed up when you get exposed to toxins, poisons, and venoms. So when you get exposed to unknown chemicals the body doesn't know how to process, it increases the enzymes to try to clear them away and detoxify them. Well, they're the same enzymes that convert our hormones. So we go and build up good testosterone from good lifestyle and everything like that. But then as we get exposed to various chemicals, they upregulate these enzymes that go and convert testosterone to estrogen or go and convert testosterone to dihydrotestosterone. So actually, I should take a step back.
What's dihydrotestosterone?
Yeah. That's what I was just thinking. We went straight in with some big words. So, so we all know. So testosterone is the one we talk about as the male hormone. Okay, so it does most of the masculinization during puberty and all that sort of stuff. So testosterone has a lot of great effects as itself. So it does muscle regeneration, it does repair. You would have known all about it, Ty, back in the day when you're training, how great you feel with a high level of testosterone physically.
Superman, legit.
Yeah, you build like crazy amount of muscle and bone and good tissues all over your body. But the recovery, the ability to modulate your immune system and inflammation and not have that soreness and just go straight into like muscle gains and that sort of stuff, as well as libido, motivation, and drive. It helps with an efficient immune response and an efficient stress response and everything when it's great. Actually, getting testosterone up is not that hard. If you've got functioning testicles and that sort of stuff in men, and and that sort of stuff in women with ovaries and that sort of stuff, it's quite easy to get testosterone to surge or spike. It's actually trying to maintain testosterone in its healthy ranges and normal, or even the high end of the healthy ranges, without it converting. So most of the time we get a big surge of testosterone. I mean, I could show you my boobs or something and you go, oh, my testosterone's up. And that's been shown in studies, not my boobs, but boobs. So when people get aroused and their blokes get aroused, their testosterone can come up, but then it quickly converts because our body wants to try to maintain ratios between hormones and not have any particular hormone that's extra high. So the more you spike and the more you surge your testosterone, the more it converts and that sort of stuff to these other things. So there's two main pathways we'll talk about. It can convert through to estrogen. And so you can imagine a lot of that conversion happens in fat tissue. So testosterone converts to estrogen in like the breast tissue and then the love handles and that. So that's how we can get boobs, man boobs, muffin tops, front veranda, and that sort of stuff. So it's just the testosterone as it surges, the fat tissue takes it up and converts it through to estrogen. And then the same pathway can convert testosterone through to dihydrotestosterone, or not the same pathway, it's a different pathway altogether. So let's go back. Testosterone converts to estrogen through an enzyme called aromatase, and that happens mainly in fat tissue. So man boobs, love handles, prostate is another problem for that. Alternatively, it can go down an enzyme called 5-alpha reductase that converts it into a thing called dihydrotestosterone. Now, dihydrotestosterone is actually a more active form of testosterone. And the funny thing is when you get a big surge of dihydrotestosterone, you also feel pretty damn good initially, but it can make you quite angry and a bit irrational with your moods and temper and violent and that sort of stuff, aggressive.
I remember that.
Yeah, and that's dihydrotestosterone. And if you do it for long enough, man, it can make proper changes to your brain that don't always change back easily. So
desirable.
yeah. But I mean, we're very flexible and we can change everything. So that's just half the time it's just becoming aware that there's been a hormonal change and then modifying your behavior, and then your infrastructure will change to suit your new attitude. But with dihydrotestosterone, that's the one that causes the acne, male pattern baldness, hair on your back and all that sort of stuff, where you lose it off your head and you get it everywhere else. But also dihydrotestosterone causes that, pot belly, beer belly, or dad belly, that deeper fat around the organs. So what you'll find is the ratios between testosterone, estrogen, and dihydrotestosterone will determine how well your tissues grow. And so if you get too much estrogen and dihydro and not enough testosterone, then things go weird. That's when we get like different fat tissue. That's when they link that to cancers and all that sort of stuff. Because that's why they always talked about testosterone being, driving prostate cancer, but they couldn't work out why teenagers didn't get it when they had the most amount of testosterone than all. It was actually the dihydrotestosterone that mainly drives it. And now, more recently, they discovered estrogen as a major trigger for prostate problems in men as well. So you'll see, and it's so easy to see the pathways. Because basically your body composition. So if you're getting the feminization, if you're getting the man boobs, the love handles, the nice curves, the hourglass figure, and you're a man and that sort of stuff, it's usually going down the estrogen pathway. But if you're getting that hard dad belly, losing your butt and gaining a belly, maybe getting a bit of baldness and losing that hair, maybe getting some acne and hair on the back or something like that, it's going down the dihydrotestosterone pathway. And ideally we keep it as testosterone and it gets to function the way it's meant to.
Bloody oath. And I've got some like serious experience in all of the above symptoms. Like I'm just going to relate it back to when I was doing all the bodybuilding stuff a few years ago, and that was the main focus, was for me to increase testosterone so I could put on the most amount of muscle mass, so that when I got on stage in a pair of shiny jocks, I looked awesome, nice and
Yeah.
hard, and we were not chasing those, the hips or anything like that. And yeah, like it's pretty wild when you can see those little symptoms come up, and being aware of them, because, like, as you said, you feel amazing with a big increase in testosterone, whether it's testosterone or dihydrotestosterone. But where I knew that, it was dihydro and it was going down that pathway, is in that bodybuilding space for me. I would get very short tempered and be like, the world is ending. I'm going to kill everyone. And then, like, feel awesome and then go straight to that and be really fiery. And I
Yeah.
know a lot of the other guys that were bodybuilding were very similar to that.
Mm. And
And then,
that's dihydro. So that's
yeah,
dihydro does that. Estrogen, if it goes down the other pathway and you get estrogen, then what estrogen does is you get less of an immediate aggressive response, but it blocks your negative feedback. So if your testosterone and estrogen, then mentally what happens is you start thinking on a process. Whether you act on it or not is irrelevant, because you can't switch it off. And it
yeah,
just goes round and round and round. Where with dihydrotestosterone, it's like, the world's going to end, smash, bang. What's for lunch?
Hulk mode.
It's like, but the estrogen ones, it just dwells, and, that sort of stuff. So massive
Yeah,
difference there.
yeah, fully.
Yeah.
And it's so interesting with that fat and whatnot, because I want to bring something up, and for a lot of the guys that listen to this, and you're chasing that testosterone gain, and you do want that. I had that so often in the bodybuilding space. Like, guys would come to me for bodybuilding composition. They didn't want to compete or anything, but they're like, "Oh, bro, like, I've got this testosterone that I got from old mate at the gym there. Like, I want to start using this." But they're actually overweight. And that's what I want to drive home for everyone here. Like, if you are someone that is going to go and use, performance enhancers or something like that, because that's what I used to get a lot of guys come to me for that, obviously, because I was a bodybuilder. But if you're not set up in the position where your body can effectively use that testosterone, you'll probably end up becoming, more estrogen dominant, and you'll actually turn on the wrong pathways. So you'll just get riddled with symptoms of, feeling irritated, having a hairy back, pimples, more man boobs, and you end up just having this shit ass ratio. But maybe you can explain that a little bit better. But that was a very common thing that I was getting in that consulting space.
Oh man, absolutely. And in fact, that's one of the reasons why I never turned to the dark side, as much as I just wanted to kind of get the big muscles and be shredded, especially
Yeah.
when I was in the industry known as like the fat possum and a bee scientist and shit. Like, I just get on the gear and like be as cool as the guys insulting me. But man, I was dead set paranoid. I was dead set paranoid because I was fat. Like, I had that fat, and I knew that if anyone was ever going to take steroids and get boobs and go bald, it would be me. After being a naturopath my whole life and like talking about this stuff, I knew if I did it, that's where it goes. So it was like kept me away from it. That's for sure. But man, what happens with these things is not only do we look at the conversion when you're doing it, but there's also, like you were mentioning earlier, that you get the rebound suppression. So when your body's making testosterone, the parts of your body that make testosterone, like your testicles and adrenal gland, and by the way, so far we've only been talking about guys, but we
Yeah.
will talk a lot about women with this as well, because it's the same hormones everywhere.
Yeah.
But typically we won't talk about your testicles like we are right now. So unless you choose to identify as one with testicles, well, then that's cool too.
Yeah.
So what you'll find is you'll get the negative feedback that'll tell your body not to bother making testosterone. So the parts of your body that are responsible for making testosterone can atrophy or shrink or switch off, and then it's hard to get the little things to start again once they've been neglected and offended the way they were and told they weren't needed. And so what happens is the way we get things started again is basically trying to induce and tell the brain that your body's got no testosterone, and remind your brain that there's no circulating testosterone, so we can ask your body to go make more. Because when you're putting in from the outside, it bypasses the natural production, of course, and it goes straight in your brain, goes, man, we got massive amount of testosterone everywhere, stop making more. And also what it does is it tells your body to convert that testosterone through to something else. Now, this includes even natural spikes. You know, anything you do that will naturally just spike it temporarily or something like that, you've just got to control the conversion pathways, which is why you'll find a lot of supplements that can increase testosterone in the short term can often have a negative net effect in the long term. Classic one's D-aspartic acid.
Yes, I was hoping you were going to
Man, it's one of the worst test boosters I've ever seen, because what it does is it's basically a nerve irritant to a certain degree through the aspartate pathways, and in the D form, it basically doesn't have as much blood effects. You know, so basically, we'll go through and trigger luteinizing hormone production and release, which will then tell your testes to release testosterone, which is all great if you were just a big testicle. But the problem is we've got fat tissue and everything as well, full of aromatase. So when you get D-aspartic acid going all through your body, it'll actually tell your fat tissue to increase the amount of aromatization of the testosterone. So you'll get a short-term spike of test, like within a week or two. And that's why they usually try to cut off the studies by about 2 weeks or 4 weeks, because when they continued it for about 3 weeks and up to a month and up to 3 months, the net effect was that they had lower levels of testosterone and high levels of estrogen because the body was converting it all. The crazy thing is the people that are selling the D-aspartic acid are referencing that same paper where there's paragraphs in it that they talk about the testosterone effect from testicles, but then they ignore the rest of the paper that talks about the aromatase and the conversion and the buildup of estrogen. So things like that just stimulate the release aren't as good. If you have a look at a lot of the herbs and that sort of stuff, what I love about herbs and natural medicine is how they have multiple functions. Like they work on so many different levels, ranging from the gut microbiome to the liver pathways that might eliminate and detoxify the testosterone quickly. They can slow that down. But often, if you have a look at things like, you know, tribulus and shilajit and epimediums, maca, a lot of those sort of things will actually reduce the sensitivity in the brain on the negative feedback. So what that means is they block the amount of testosterone that your brain thinks you got. So it tricks your body into thinking you don't have enough. And then it sends a message from your brain to your body saying, make more.
Yeah.
And that way the parts of your body, typically the testicles and adrenal glands, get better at making testosterone to fill in the gap. And at the same time, those same compounds can actually slow down and inhibit the conversion pathways.
Yeah.
So you'll often find something that will trick the brain into thinking you need more tests, so it makes more at the same time as it might block aromatase or block 5-alpha reductase, which will keep your testosterone levels in that optimal range for longer, you know?
Yeah. And you touched on there with the adrenals as well. I feel like that's a super important thing to touch on, you know, in this day and age too, because maybe it's just my lifestyle at the moment as well, but there's so much more screen time. There's so much more stimulant. Like I'm drinking coffee right now.
That's right. As soon as you said stimulant, well, actually, I wouldn't mind some of that.
Yeah. So like, I think it would be really valuable for everyone listening as well to touch on the role of stress. And I'm talking about, you know, not stress as just like, oh, life's stressful, but that stresses on the body and how that can affect, you know, testosterone production. Because if you're jacked up on stimulants all day, you know, your testosterone production is just not going to happen, whether that's male or female.
Yeah, that's right. And it's I like to simplify everything. We talk about being in either survive mode or thrive mode.
Yeah.
So we basically having a good surge of testosterone doesn't help you survive. And definitely having the motivation to stop and have a shag and that sort of stuff is not going to help you survive. So basically what you'll find is the more stimulants and stress you're under, and actually the definition of stress is anything that makes a change to your body. So stress could be temperature changes, which we all want to talk about soon. Stimulants, screen time, toxic exposure, which we already mentioned. And part of the way our body manifests a good stress response is it speeds up detoxification for enzymes that help with poison and venom. And in doing so, actually increases a conversion of testosterone through to estrogen and dihydrotestosterone, because and that's why those things like pesticides, plastics, fertilizers, cadmiums, and all those sort of things will actually convert your hormones away, because it's upregulated those other enzymes, thinking that they're poisons and venoms and going to kill you. So it just does that. But cortisol and those sort of hormones basically telling your body that you're under survival mechanisms, and the other stuff is not as important. So it can slow down the testicular production. So we have this thing called HPA axis, which is the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis. Yeah. And when that axis is running, the HPA axis is running, as a general rule, it switches off the others. So it switches off the HPG, which is the gonadal axis, and the thyroid axis. And so it's just like, it's all about this one axis. Let's just do that. Yeah. And then what happens is the adrenal gland has to convert cholesterol into cortisol, and then cortisol comes out as our main stress hormone. So the reason why this is a problem is because over time you become so determined to make cortisol constantly that you basically have no resources left to make anything else. Now, when your testicles aren't making adequate testosterone, your body will recruit the adrenal glands to make testosterone because it makes it from DHEA. But it can't make it from the cortisol pathway as easily. So you'll find that if your adrenal gland's too busy pumping out bloody cortisol, then it's not making DHEA. And often we'll measure cortisol DHEA ratios to see how someone's adrenal gland's coping with the stress, to see if they're still capable of making adequate levels of DHEA, to convert through. So what you'll find is when we get to menopause, or male menopause, which we call andropause, basically what happens is our testicles... A lot of
people aren't aware of andropause, hey?
No, they're not, because they never... This is what bugs me. These poor bloody women spend a whole lifetime getting a bloody oral contraceptive pill shoved down their throat, telling them it's going to fix everything. They get hormonal modifications right from bloody puberty, and then they get through to this phase when then they're put on HRT for menopause and everything like that. And this menopause is a big deal. Because you've been on the pill and it's screwed up your ability to manage your hormones your whole life. Now we're going to replace them with a HRT. Like, remember the famous one, Premarin, which was named by pregnant mare urine? That's where it came from. It was on the market for 50 years before they studied it as part of the WIMS study. And then they pulled the pin on the study because they were killing people. They'd already been on the market, and then they're going, oh shit, we better just put a label on it now saying it might kill you. But anyway, but blokes, they don't like giving them testosterone, because the testosterone goes and helps them build muscle and burn fat and makes them feel fantastic and everything like that. So they don't want to manage any of this male menopause. So we don't want to talk about andropause, because part of the solution for it is the same as the anabolic steroids or something, but it's managed properly and allows people to feel great. And they don't want you to do that. They'd rather just allow you to go into an andropause that then leads to cardiovascular disease, where they got a heap of drugs for. They'd rather not you converting your cholesterol to testosterone, because then they can give you cholesterol bloody medication. It just drives you crazy. You're better off letting them be obese and sick, because we can sell more drugs, because we could fix it all by getting their hormones right. And preventative medicine, there's no money in that. That's silly. And no one can patent testosterone. We made it ourselves. So, it's a terrible business idea of yours, Ty, to try to treat andropause and prevent those sort of things. Much better off selling cholesterol medication, blood pressure medication, and treating them for cancers. But that's a different talk.
That could be a whole topic on its own.
Oh, wouldn't it, mate? So I remember what we were talking about before that then. No, andropause. So what happens is, if you've got adrenal exhaustion, when your testicles stop making testosterone, then you're going to hit andropause pretty hard, because your adrenal gland's not going to be capable of picking up the slack to make up that testosterone that it needs once the nuts stop. So that's why it's so important to manage stress levels, support the adrenal gland, making sure you're having really good sleep at night, so you get a chance for your adrenal gland to switch off the cortisol production and increase the production of everything else, such as DHEA. So you wake up in the morning with a nice big surge of DHEA. In fact, one of my favorite, Tonkat Ali. That's what Tonkat Ali, that's what made me so excited about when I was researching Tonkat Ali, which is, common names like the Malaysian Viagra, because it'll put a horn on a jellyfish, that stuff. But what it also does is it drops if you take it at night, it can drop cortisol by up to 20%, and it can increase your morning DHEA by about 15 to 20%. So basically tells your body to drop that cortisol and then start using some of the resources to actually go and make some other hormones. So it's a wicked herb for that.
Fully. And they're the specific herbs that I used when, I decided to hang up the shiny jocks and not do bodybuilding anymore. And, at the time, that last prep for Arnold's and everything, I used, a cycle, performance enhancers and whatnot. And then after that, like, I just went cold turkey. I didn't use any, like, over the counter meds or anything like that to do that period of, fixing up my testosterone with drugs. And I decided to do it with herbs. Tonkat Ali, Shilajit, adequate magnesium, zinc, and selenium, which is what you also told me. And then focusing on managing stress levels. And when I'm talking about managing stress, what the things I was doing are like meditation and breath work in the morning, a slow cruisy walk, and then I would train. But when I was training, I was hard, but that's also a stressor. And then on the back end of that, I would take recovery supplements on top of that to ensure that I was recovering from those workouts. Because I feel like that's a big pitfall that some people get into as well. They're like, they're training really hard and doing all this stuff, and they're always like, go, go, go. And a lot of the time, overtraining, will friggin' screw with your testosterone levels. So let's get into that, and then we'll roll into, women's testosterone, because we haven't even touched on that yet.
So you're right. So inflammation and oxidative stress it basically can create a lot of problems because they are more stress. They tell your body to you got to get back in and you're under stress. So basically work out how to survive that stress. You could be getting attacked by a lion or something, So it makes changes your priorities a little bit if you get too much of that. Plus a lot of these systems get totally disturbed with inflammatory stress and oxidative stress. And a lot of the antioxidants and anti-inflammatory compounds all help to calm down those converting enzymes and protect the tissue. Actually, while we're talking about stress, don't let me forget, because I noticed in some of the questions, people were asking me about temperature changes. And there's that big school of thought, or there's that big talk about icing everything. Like we all do the ice baths and that sort of stuff. Not we all do, but I prefer the warm water.
You got an ice pack on your balls right now, don't you?
No, I don't. I don't. I just do that for fun, like sometimes, but not as part of work. But so basically what happens is, I tell you, I did have this theory one day. I got in a big argument with my wife actually over this because she was telling me something. And then I was just daydreaming. And she said, "What are you thinking?" And I actually answered the question, which was terrible. And I basically explained, I was just thinking that I reckon I have a theory that, how rock and roll, great music, and disco, like fantastic. I love disco. I love rock and roll. But you noticed how they kind of phased out to a certain degree. And then we got rap and hip hop, took over.
Yeah.
So what I was thinking was rock and roll and disco had very tight pants. And so when they wore the really tight pants, their testicles they would have been shagging so many women because the rock and roll guys and the disco guys were the coolest of all. But they had these really tight pants. And when you're really tight pants, if your testicles don't hang away from your body, you need your testes to be a couple of degrees cooler than the rest of your body to be functioning optimally. And if you overheat your testicles, you can't make as much sperm and your sperm's all defective and that sort of stuff. And it reduces fertility. So it's more likely that the rap and hip hop people would have done more breeding than the rock and roll and disco people. So then we come into an era of rap and hip hop with their big baggy pants, some of them backwards and inside out, and you know what I mean? And then they would have been a lot more fertile. Probably, And
that's
so
why
then
I don't own underpants.
And then
it's comfier.
And then I do rap instead. No. And then what happens is eventually, I reckon that they would have bred less of the genetic code that prefers good music. No, it prefers like rock and roll and disco and that. And then they, anyway. So that got me thinking about temperature of testicles as well. So you do want them a couple of degrees cooler, and that's why they need to hang and be away from your body. But what I was curious about is, how a lot of people do the saunas and everything. And then we got a lot of people doing these ice baths.
Yeah.
So they go beyond that temperature. So what I found, and there's some cool data, and then our mate Lucas and that, they were talking a lot about icing their balls and getting big spikes in testosterone. What actually happens, what I worked out, is there's this whole process in our testicles called autophagy. So there's this catabolic process, or cannibalistic almost. It's like, so what happens is if you damage or you traumatize the tissue, or if you get blue balls, or if you overload on sperm and that sort of stuff, and your body's got to break it down, it actually breaks the sperm, kills the fish, but it does it in a local area so that it liberates all the nutrients you need to make more. And the actual process of damaging the sperm itself and inducing this thing called autophagy actually stimulates a big spike in testosterone production, so that way you can rebuild that sperm and grow more sperm. And then it definitely increases the sperm statistically from when it was damaged to when after it rebuilt it. It was a big change. But yeah, it definitely increases testosterone. So what I was curious about is that cold therapy is quite a stress. And what's weird about cold is it's a vasoconstrictor. So it'll constrict the blood vessels, and it constricts the blood vessels out to the extremities, like the nuts and that sort of stuff, where a lot of our other data showing improving of testosterone was through nitric oxide, which is vasodilation, increasing blood flow. Yeah. So with the heat and hot and saunas, you get the increased blood flow. And when the cold, you get the vasoconstriction. Now, they both induce a certain amount of autophagy, but damage to the cells that allows your body to respond with more. But they did find that the cold stuff was actually also associated with higher levels of cortisol that showed a bigger stress response, which actually could impair things over time and not be where they showed the hot water and the saunas and that sort of stuff actually induced a lot of nitric oxide vasodilation, made the nuts hang lower to get away from the hot body and everything, which actually increased testosterone production to a certain degree as well without the cortisol. So anyway, it's a really interesting thing. So if you get too hot, you cook your nuts and the little fish die, and you got to rebuild them. But so anyway, it's interesting to see that what we want to do is stay around those normal levels. You only really want to be dropping the testicle temperature to 2 to 3 degrees, from the normal body core temperature, and you really don't want it to be increasing beyond the core temperature at all. So yeah, there is some merit into those things. But if you're not controlling conversion pathways, when you get a big spike in testosterone, it's all for naught.
Yeah,
and it'll convert through. Yeah.
Well, that's what I'm just coming back to now. Like, I can see how both like heat therapy or cold therapy could work when you've got a strategy in place, but it also comes back to like, is your body set up to function to actually handle extra testosterone or anything like that? So I hope for you guys who are on here live now or watching the replay or listening to this, that you're beginning to realize that the body's holistic. And a lot of the things that we've been talking about here is that, stress can have this ripple effect, right? So, stress is going to affect the way that our gut digests food. Stress is also going to affect the way that we produce our sex hormones, right? So that's why if you don't have a practice in place that you're doing consistently to manage the levels of cortisol in your body and good regulation there, then you're going to have all of these other issues, and it'll be really friggin' hard to find a way to fix things. So having that strong foundation always is going to help out with any of the stuff that we're talking about to actually damn work.
Yeah, and everyone's holistic system's different because your occupation and that sort of stuff can make a massive difference. If you're a panel beater exposed to all these chemicals and that sort of stuff and paints, or if you're working in industry where you're dealing a lot with fossil fuels or plastics, pesticides, it'll be a slightly different approach to each of those. But generally, you maintain your stress levels, you maintain good nutrition, and you also help to make sure that you've got good antioxidants and everything in through your diet. You can help to maintain a lot of those conversion pathways. Like aromatase inhibitors. There's so many of them. Mushrooms are full of them. So the whole agaricus range of mushrooms, which is like your button mushrooms and your portobello mushrooms, and that, they've been shown to be some of the best. And how's the doctrine of signatures, man? They look like little boobs or something, you know, like that. You'll see that the whole way through. Oh, I tell you what I was trying to find, and this I got caught up researching. I was trying to find which one did the biggest surge of testosterone: cold water therapy, hot saunas, and that, or boobs. You know, because we're talking about just looking at those things as well, because these things are just temporary surges. They don't maintain the levels long enough to create any significant change if you don't have a good, healthy system. So the aromatase inhibitors, because someone did ask, you know, what were the foods that inhibit aromatase?
We'll roll into the questions now. We might as well touch on them. Actually, before we get into that, do you want to touch on testosterone and women? Because we haven't, we'll go into that.
And then the treatments are the same. The treatments are the same. So that's a good idea. So in women, basically, estrogen's made from testosterone. So in the ovaries and that sort of stuff, in the first half of the cycle, the body's converting testosterone through to estrogen. And in fact, when that conversion doesn't happen and the androgens accumulate is when they can get a cyst that can contribute to things like polycystic ovarian syndrome. So women have testosterone. And when we talked about the blokes getting conversion of testosterone through to estrogen, that's a big problem in women with things like endometriosis and breast cancers and stuff like that, where they've got an extra conversion. Big problem with obesity as well. And we talked a lot about that pathways in that estrobolome one that we did last week, so they can go back and watch that. But testosterone converting to dihydrotestosterone in women's a bigger problem again. Well, I shouldn't say again, they're all equally problematic. But the dihydrotestosterone in women is the one that can accumulate, that causes cystic acne and cystic ovaries. It causes male pattern baldness in women, where you get the thinner in that particular area of the head. And hirsutism, where you get the darker hair everywhere else on the arms and lips and that sort of thing. It also causes the pot belly. So it can cause pot belly, acnes, and that sort of stuff. It does really help with their muscle growth as well. So they can get some pretty strong muscle. And in amongst that muscle, you'll find a decent pot belly and that sort of stuff typically. It just creates that. And usually not as easy to build the glutes, but tend to thicken out in other areas. So that's a big problem with women, and it's often associated with an insulin-resistant syndrome. So with a polycystic ovarian syndrome and with testosterone dominance in women, it's often associated with a process known as insulin resistance. So what's really weird is the insulin itself directly can increase testosterone production via the adrenal glands, which is something that not many people were aware of because it doesn't even involve the ovaries, but it can create the increase in the androgens that creates all the same symptom picture. And then the same sort of process can be happening in the ovaries, stopping that egg from developing, so they make a cyst and just build up testosterone instead. So it's surprisingly common in women, because I think insulin resistant syndromes are becoming more common as well. So anytime we get an insulin resistance from having like a high carb diet, from having an overgrowth of bugs or dysbiotic microbiome is a major cause for insulin resistance, because those bugs like to feed on the sugar and they don't want to share it with you. So basically they make you resistant to insulin so that you're not stealing all the sugar, so they get more. But your fat cells don't get resistant to insulin, so they take it, and so I'll have it. And then that also increases the amount of conversion happening there. So what's an interesting pattern with women in particular, and I think men too, but I haven't seen much research in it. But when women get a buildup of dihydrotestosterone, that's actually inside their cells. So it's not. It doesn't contribute a lot. That's why it's hard to test dihydrotestosterone. It takes ages. It's not as easy to measure just hormones out of the blood, So what you'll find is the dihydrotestosterone is found inside the ovaries and really internally in their body. And it sends a message to their brain, because they get lots of blood flow there. And the brain goes, man, sweet, we got a heap of dihydrotestosterone and we got a heap of testosterone. So we need to make more estrogen. But if the ovaries conversion of testosterone to estrogen is blocked, and that's why they're building up the dihydro, then a signal goes out to the body saying, hey, you guys have got to make more estrogen somewhere. And so the fat cells go, I can do it. So the fat cells they make testosterone convert to estrogen through aromatase on the hips. So what you'll find happening is many women will come into the clinic or go to their coach and saying, I've got this estrogen dominant body shape. I've got these hips. I've got these big estrogen hips, and I can't get rid of my cellulite and the backs of my arms. And then they go and measure their bloods, and they find that they're actually not that dominant in estrogen at all. They're actually really high in testosterone. And then they go and question them, and they find they're getting the acne. They got the polycystic ovarian syndrome. They got all these internal signs of testosterone buildup. But then what happens is the fat cells are over on the side doing whatever the hell they want. They're not contributing any estrogen back to the blood supply. So they go and make estrogen, try to fix the ovaries, but they don't even let it go. They use it themselves on the butt cheeks or the fat cells near it, and then they just keep swelling. So when women, they often become compartmentalized, where you'll have a section of their body that's estrogen dominant trying to offset their testosterone dominance. So it gets very confusing for the people and the practitioner, because they're going, I look like I'm full of estrogen, but I got all these, my body acts like I'm full of testosterone. So you'll find that when they get diagnosed with a polycystic ovarian syndrome or hyperandrogen syndromes or whatever, but they have this estrogen body shape, and it breaks your heart, because they're like, it's a very hard cycle to break, because the tricky thing to breaking it is you've got to actually fix the testosterone problem internally, so that these signals stop going out to the body saying, make estrogen in your fat, So, and that's the challenge. And the way to fix the testosterone problems internally with those sort of conditions is usually not by modifying the hormones as much as it is by actually fixing the cause, which is often changing the way the insulin works and that insulin resistance syndrome. So it gets a little bit complicated, but then we also have lots and lots of really cool tools that we can utilize to actually block testosterone when it's high. And let me tell you then the best one for that, because it's another supplement you've probably taken for the wrong reason, but DIM. So diindol methane is the best thing that we have to block testosterone effects. The DIM was always prescribed for polycystic ovarian syndrome and prostate problems until someone decided to market it and sell it and advertise it as something that will block estrogen, when it's actually a phytoestrogen that blocks testosterone. But it's the number one supplement sold for estrogen detoxification. And as an anti-estrogen. And I can't get my head around why they get away with it, because it's just wrong. There's nothing. There's so much data talking about DIM as an anti-androgen. So if you consider that most test-boosting supplements out there will try to combine D-aspartic acid and DIM, with the end result of you being estrogenic. It's crazy. I need to make another comment too while we're talking about supplementation, because what another pattern I've seen is so many women wanting high testosterone so they perform better and build more muscle, and they'll often go and take test boosters that are designed for men, and it's a very bad idea. So with the brain, when the brain sends a message to your body to make hormones, it releases like luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone. Now, follicle stimulating hormones called that because it stimulates follicles, and our follicles are eggs, so sperm and ovaries. Okay, so in men have nuts or testicles that make sperm, and when men have follicle stimulating hormone exposure, they increase testosterone production. When women in their ovaries get exposed to follicle stimulating hormone, that follicle stimulating hormone increases estrogen production. So exact opposite effect. Okay, so herbs like tribulus, epimedium, maca, shilajit. I'm trying to think of most of those ones that increase follicle stimulating hormone activity, or often the ones that have been studied with men and shown to increase sperm. Will often in women increase follicle stimulating hormone and result in estrogen production instead. So you'll often find young women that want to take testosterones and everything like that using things like tribulus has an estrogenic effect. Okay. Save that for menopause. That's when in the naturopath clinic, we would use the same products that we'd use in young men to build testosterone and sperm. We use them in the middle-aged women to support through menopause. And that sort of stuff by increasing estrogen production. So that's an interesting one.
Bloody earth. Well, to wrap up this front end, and then we'll get into some questions here. And any of you guys that are listening, like, feel free to start just chucking questions in here, because we'll start going through the ones that are in the group first. But to wrap all of this up in regards to testosterone, what the hell do we need to do to just, make sure that we're not turning on these pathways that are not so desirable and giving us breeder hips and cellulite and things like that? And what can we do just to make sure that we've got those pathways set up?
So I always, again, try to simplify things.
Yeah.
I initially talk about building a base foundation or a stable state to which to launch from.
Absolutely.
And that's based on nutrition and good lifestyle. So making sure we're not deficient in things like zinc and selenium. All our hormones are made from cholesterol, so you don't need to really, we've got plenty of that. Making sure you're not deficient in things like vitamin D, which was interesting because, again, when I was looking at the icing of the balls, I was curious of what happened if we suntanned our balls, because there's a whole school of thought hanging your balls in the sun to increase the oxidation of your cholesterol, increase vitamin D, and potentially also enhance testosterone. There's a little bit of data talking about that. Well, it's really hard to find.
It wasn't overcast, so I'd give that a run today.
I give it a crack anyway. Yeah. Just anyway. So talk about this stuff before time. So, so zinc, selenium are so important, because if you get deficiencies in those enzymes, in those nutrients, the enzymes that convert the hormones run like crazy. But also, you've got to realize things like zinc, magnesium, selenium, they're involved in over 500 different enzymes that build things as well. So every time you need to build something or break something apart, we're going to need those nutrients. But also consider that zinc and selenium are also some of our major chelation ingredients that we use to detoxify the same things like cadmiums and fossil fuels that create the imbalance. So we don't know really which comes first. Is it the chemical exposure that makes the enzymes run faster? Is it the chemical exposure depleting nutrients like zinc and selenium, creating a deficiency state? And then we get all caught up, because when we know enough about the body, we also realize that zinc and selenium are essential for thyroid hormone conversion. And if your thyroid's not right, then your hormones are all over the shop. In fact, we should do a thyroid one soon too.
Yeah, well, I reckon we can roll into that next week. But for the listeners, an easy way to get that in through nutrition is a couple of Brazil nuts per day, right?
So I think it's like
without
3 or
even
4
taking
Brazil
a
nuts.
supplement, 3 or 4 Brazil nuts, and that'll have you guys covered.
Yeah, and it's cool, eh? And then all your nuts and seeds are pretty good in zinc, selenium, other things like oysters and that sort of stuff. You'll get a fair bit of that out of your animal proteins and that sort of thing as well. Things like they're the main nutrients that we really talk about when we go through with a testosterone, and a lot of the other B vitamins and that are cofactors for every reaction. But our foods, man, we have so much cool foods that are antioxidants that help to control these pathways as well. So the aromatase inhibitors, like I mentioned before, agaricus mushroom species, so your button mushrooms, portobellos, lycopene from your tomato paste, a tablespoon of tomato paste. Lycopene's amazing, and you can't destroy it. Oh, I never forget about it, because I'm obsessed with it to a certain degree, and I'm blown away that I
eat her every Friday.
Yeah, man, and man, that's my favorite thing too. Is the tomato sauce and stuff. So, lycopene doesn't get destroyed through heating, cooking, processing. It actually gets concentrated, and it's red. So, like, look at things like tomato paste and stuff like that. A tablespoon of tomato paste got more lycopene than most of the supplements on the market. And in fact, what was my favorite thing in my clinic that I'd tell people to do when they're getting these weird abnormal cells popping up everywhere is a tablespoon of tomato paste and a teaspoon of turmeric, and have that as a drink. Throw that in as like a cup of soup or something like that. Also, too, I used to tell people when you steam your veggies, you're losing a lot of the nutrients. So keep your steamed water, add that into your tomato paste and turmeric, and have it as like a hot drink with your meals to improve your digestion, get the nutrients through. But you do that all the time, and you're going to get a good accumulation of lycopene. And lycopene accumulates in our prostate and breast tissue. In fact, breast tissues are one of the major lycopene reservoirs in the body, and it helps to control both conversion pathways, aromatase and 5-alpha reductase. So those sort of things are cool. But then onions, garlic, and brassica species, so all your broccoli, your kales, all those sort of things, really, really good at help control those conversion pathways from testosterone through to estrogen. Grape seeds, cannabis has been shown to be an interesting one as well, where they're researching a little bit more. But yeah, grape seeds, and then from the grape seeds and skins and that's all the wine and everything. I think there's been almost more
Spoken about that.
research
That ties
upon.
into your gut health stuff too,
Yep,
microbiome.
yep. Oh, and also if you have a look at my favorite things like pomegranate, and then you have a look at things like strawberries and that, as well as shilajit. This is an interesting link. Maca, shilajit, pomegranates, and strawberries all contain a similar compound that converts through to these urolithins that help to regulate your hormones through your body and the receptor activity through your body and help to recover, regenerate, repair. And they're all what we call postbiotic compounds. So and shilajit is the ultimate postbiotic compound. And we mentioned shilajit a few times, but not many people actually know what it is.
Yeah.
But it is crazy. It's like compost. It's broken down plant matter that just as the plants break down and die and all the leaves and bark and everything go and the sap and that, it runs through the cracks of the rocks where you've got all these wicked minerals. And then in amongst all that, you have microbes. So the microbes are feeding on the organic matter from the plants. They've got the nutrients coming out of all the minerals, the folvates, the zincs and everything we're talking about. And then it goes through and ferments this whole thing on the rocks and creates this resin called shilajit. And when they test this shilajit, it's like full of nutrients, it's full of microbes, probiotics, fatty acids that are what we call postbiotics. So it's like got compounds that you'd only find in fermented foods and other things like that. But it's actually done on the rocks, which means you can actually get it and test it before you take it and see what the hell it is. Well, as opposed to eating all of that plant matter and rocks and then relying on your microbiome to make it yourself, it makes it a little bit more variable, which is why you'll see such consistent results from something like shilajit that you measure and you test and you know what it is, compared to the variable relationships you might get from things like maca, pomegranates and that on your testosterone, because it depends on what microbiome you got. Oh man, another cool food we never considered would be caltrop. In Australia, there's that three-pronged burr that grows out west. It's an absolute pest. It gets in everything, and it can even puncture tires and stuff like that. It's this big, horrendous burr. The livestock hate it. Well, that's what we import into Australia for hundreds of dollars a kilo, called Tribulus terrestris. So Tribulus is Australian native plants, caltrop, out whoop whoop. You'll get it. It grows in the sandy soil, and it's some of the strongest stuff in the world. And that's what Tribulus actually is. And we import, the Bulgarian Tribulus is the best because the Bulgarian Tribulus companies told us so. No, it just depends which ones got the actives. Yeah. Nettles, stinging nettles and that sort of stuff, very good at inhibiting. Fenugreek is another really good compound. Fenugreek will lower the sex hormone binding globulin, which helps to free up the testosterone. So you get more free testosterone and activity through it that way. Berberine does the opposite, which is interesting. So berberine will lower testosterone, which is why berberine is excellent to use in women with testosterone excess, like PCOS, because if you think berberine does blood sugar control and it kills off the bad bugs that are creating the problems, as well as sorts out the bile, which we didn't even get to talk about. But then berberine increases the sex hormone binding globulin to deactivate some of the testosterone to make the symptoms less severe. Oh man, so much we can talk about. I just go crazy. But we will write it all up. I'm going to have to turn this into a big book.
Yeah, and for all of you guys, what I'm going to be doing is, taking this information that Matt's giving us here and then all the reference studies, and we'll put them into guides in the groups. That'll be coming next week. So you guys will be able to access like a cheat sheet for each of these lessons just to reference back to, because I know there's a lot going on here. But the main thing that, I'm always going to keep driving home here is that foundation. And I think actually I've got a program there called Daily Meds. I'll give it to anyone that actually wants it. So it's a video series, all that sort of stuff. I'll give you guys access to it just because it is so important to just have your basics down. If you don't have your daily meds, and I talk about meds as minimum effective dose before you can get results out of any protocol or program you decide to do. So we'll give you guys that, and then follow the guides. If you have something specific you want to nail with your testosterone, or you want to fix up your estrogen or detoxify, that's all going to be in this group for you guys. But we've rolled into it. We've answered a few of the questions that were there. But one of the ones was natural aromatase inhibitors, herbs to increase and support testosterone production, other hormones that affect on testosterone, and how to maintain a good balance. That's basically what we just went over. We've got another question here as well. What are the leading causes of low testosterone? We've sort of touched on that, but we can again. And
Well, I
what's
think that's a
best
good one.
to ask for? Because like it's
Sorry.
good to be aware of it, but then like how do we, test to see where the hell we're at and make decisions from that data?
Yeah. So, well, let's start with the last question first because it's the one I remember. The best way to test is through your naturopath and that sort of stuff, or through your doctor. And then we went through a phase of doing a lot of saliva hormone testing, and then we started getting really weird results. And every time you get weird results, you go back and do a blood test to clarify what your weird saliva test was. So I've given up on a lot of those, and I do a lot more, the blood testing for the hormones, and I combine that with something like a Dutch test. So if you go to a doctor, you do most of your hormone tests. Otherwise, you can go to things like iMedical online or Lab Test Direct and just order it yourself and pay for it. Or hit us up if you can't find it, and we've got accounts and stuff, and we can help you find that or tell you what to ask for and that sort of stuff. iMedical is pretty cool. You can get a lot of your testing done there, and then you just basically get your request form approved by their doctors, and then you take it into a pathology center where they collect the blood. The Dutch test is wicked. Like when you do a urine test for the metabolites, we can go and see which pathways it's gone down, so we can get a good indication of ratios between testosterone, dihydrotestosterone, and estrogens, and which estrogen pathways it's going down from there. And also we can get an indication of your cortisol, all of that through your urine, and just see your 24-hour breakdown of those compounds, so we can see how the ratios are. Yeah, because you got to remember, a blood test is just a snapshot in time. It's collecting a little bit of blood of where you are right now. So, like I was saying, you can have really crappy testosterone levels in your blood if you haven't slept well and that sort of stuff, and haven't trained for a while and feeling down and lack of motivation, and they'd be low. Or you could actually have just watched porn and iced your balls and then run in and got a spike. I don't do that, but
watch porn and then
ice your balls. We need to make t-shirts. Hey, seriously, watch porn and ice your balls. That would be like a great t-shirt.
I will wear that.
I'll wear it. I'm gonna wear the one that says smuggling peas. I get a t-shirt just said pea smuggler and nothing else, and I'm gonna make it a crop top just to confuse them.
Oh wow!
Well,
this is epic, and I'm sure that we can keep going into it. So I'll just roll into it, see if we got in. So foods and therapies to improve test levels naturally. We've touched on that. We've got the food there again. All right, here's one. So, and for those of you who were just asking in here, where are we going to be putting those guides? So just on the screen here, and I've commented as well. So it's just the X Trials Facebook group. That's where we'll be putting it for now. And then in the future, there'll be some other locations that we'll put it as well. But here's the next question. So is the suntan therapy what Ben Greenfield does with his NRI panel? How often after testing should we reset or retest for testosterone? I'm mid-range at the moment and looking to raise it. Focused on sleep and sauna for relaxation at the moment.
I don't know what an NIR panel is. I'm a bit embarrassed because I should be following more of what Ben does, but we should ask him. Awesome. He'll come on. He'll probably do a podcast. He owes me a big favor after the bloody Psalm fines.
Yeah.
No, I love Ben. No, we'll contact him and ask him. I don't know what an NIR panel is. He might be able to tell us. Do you know what an NIR panel is, Ty?
I don't know specifically what the NIR panel is, but I do know that Ben does talk
about near infrared.
So infrared. So those ones in the mornings and that he uses quite regularly, like they're awesome.
Yeah, well, the funny thing is, anytime you do that, now infrared light penetrates further than others, so you do get a deeper effect, and that's why it's a beneficial stuff with the saunas and that.
Yeah.
But all the time, these things are going to be increasing nitric oxide activity, which is going to have a vasodilatory effect, which is going to aid more nutrition and everything like that and improve the activity. This is the thing that confuses me a little bit about the ice stuff, because it does create a lot of vasoconstriction, a lot of stress, and a lot of damage, where we'll find found a lot of stuff that are slightly warming helps your body to respond by actually in the right way, you know.
Yeah.
So we'll ask Ben directly. I'll send him we'll get him a message straight away and ask him, and he might want to come on and tell us about it. And he'd have heaps of wicked tricks as well, man.
Yeah, Ben's got some of the best he's the biohacking king, so he's got all
Yeah.
the good biohacks for this stuff. So that'll be epic to get him
Oh,
on.
and such a great guy, like humble fella. Like when you meet him in the real world, he's exactly the same as he is on his podcast, which is very impressive. But he
Yeah, it's
lives it.
awesome.
He lives it, and he's obsessed with it. And it's so cool because it's a great lab rat.
Yeah, best lab rat ever.
Yeah.
And then, all right. So, how often after testing should I retest for testosterone again? Basically, so like, it depends
It
on the person. Yeah,
it depends on a lot of things. Whether you're just doing experimental to see what's happening in response to your treatments, but typically you'd want to. The short-term stuff's not as important as what happens long-term. So you want to kind of see what happens over a 3-month period and see if you can maintain relatively high levels. But it's a bit hard to say that. I know with women as well, when we're trying to regulate the menstrual cycle, we'll just say, look, let's just measure it in day 22 every cycle for a while so we can see, because it just changes on such a period. But with men running on a much larger cycle, over years and that sort of stuff, that you probably only need to measure it every couple of months when you're going to adjust your script. But symptom picture is so damn important. Once you understand the symptoms, you'd want to go through a regular symptom picture check questionnaire to maintain and get a good understanding of your symptom picture, because even the testing is irrelevant if it isn't explained in proportion to a symptom picture, because we don't know if you're resistant to hormones and therefore you have a high level, or if you're super sensitive to hormones and therefore you have a lower level, or if you've got the conversion happening. And that's where the symptom picture is so damn important. And any testing without symptoms is bullshit, in my opinion. I mean, just prescribing based on a blood test without actually talking to the person and getting an understanding of what's happening holistically,
ridiculous.
waste of time.
Well, how much is that? Like, this is one of my biggest issues, that I've always had, is like, it's getting further and further away to, like, going to see someone and, looking at their eyes, their tongue, and, touch and feel. Like, it's weird now, like, even from a practitioner standpoint. And it's just getting further and further away. Like, we're not robots. We're not machines. Like,
not even measuring the full profile. That's what
Yeah.
spins me out. Like, what's the point of measuring testosterone if you're not measuring luteinizing hormone, follicle stimulating hormone, estrogen, and dihydrotestosterone? Because I want to know what the hell's going on. And then we may throw in prolactin and that sort of stuff as well, so we know. And then I'd be really curious to see, once we get those results, I'm going to be curious about your stress levels. So it'd be nice to have had your cortisol at the same bloody time. And then just because one of those shows out of range and the others are okay, it doesn't mean when we go do the checkups, you only measure the one that was out of range. We need to measure all of them again so we can go through and see what's changing. Is your brain yelling? Oh, and what about, not many people realize this, but the hot flushes that occur in both men and women around menopause is actually caused by follicle stimulating hormone. Not the lack of hormones. It's follicle stimulating hormone coming out of the brain, yelling at the body, saying, make me some damn hormone. And the follicle stimulating hormone in the periphery creates that vasodilation flush. So they don't even know these things. And if you're not measuring dihydro and you're saying your testosterone's low, we're going to give you more test. And then this person's got prostate problems or man boobs and stuff like that because they don't know where the testosterone's going. It's like, you got to know that it's holistic, man, is the key.
Yeah. Well, guys, I think we're going to start to wrap that up here, but, just, communicating this out so much and the questions that everyone's asking. So I'll nut it out with you, no pun intended, after this on, we'll give you guys, the daily med stuff. So I'm happy to give that to everyone there. And then maybe we can even have a bit of a discussion around, maybe doing a 30-day or a 90 days. Yeah, T-shirts, but then like maybe a 90-day thing, like where everyone in the X trials goes through a process and we kind of help you guys guide through that. But it'll start off with that symptom pictures. So symptom pictures, daily meds, and then we can start talking about possibly doing some sort of focus group towards a certain outcome if everyone's interested in that.
And t-shirts.
Yeah, we've got.
I think that's
bring on the
fired up.
t-shirts. X Trials Lab Rat. I like that. We can do that.
No, the pea smuggler.
Pea smuggler. What was the other one?
Watching porn and ice my balls or something. We got so many. We will come up with all of these things.
Yeah.
We had a good one from the last episode too that someone said it should be a t-shirt.
Yeah, we're going to have to just rewatch all of these and just do it like a weekly t-shirt or something like that.
Yeah. We'll get Daz onto that.
Yeah. All right. Sweet, guys. Well,
Thank
we'll
you.
wrap that up. And yeah, that was awesome. Thank you very much, Matt.
Thank you. Thanks for having me again. It's fun.
No worries.